officially 3 for 3 on being fined by the WNBA.
Holy shit! For this?
What happens when the most outspoken player in the WNBA suddenly finds herself fined over and over, not for breaking rules on the court, but simply for speaking the truth? Sophie Cunningham thought she was just starting a podcast. Instead, she accidentally exposed a league that seems more interested in silencing its players than protecting them. Fans are calling her the voice of truth, but the WNBA calls her a problem.
WNBA have done it. They have done it. They have officially fined Sophie Cunningham every podcast episode. They have fined her because Sophie Cunningham has been fined. I'm not joking. She's been fined for a TikTok. She's been fined now, I think, for the third.
And the deeper you look, the more shocking this story becomes. It all started when Sophie Cunningham decided to launch her own podcast, Show Me Something. On paper, it seemed harmless, just a player sharing her perspective, giving fans a rare inside look at life in the league. But almost immediately, that honesty came at a price. In one of her first episodes, Sophie made a simple comment about Paige Buchers, saying she seemed to get a favorable whistle from referees. That's it. No trash talk, no insults, just an observation that millions of fans were already making online.
Inconsistencies, but at the end of the day, the quality of referees is on the WNBA too. Because again, I have no idea where the line is. Because on one hand, I kind of get it. It's normal for a league to fine you if you're going to talk bad about the league or the players in the league. Because that happens all the time in the NBA, NFL, and so on.
The league's response: a fine. Fans couldn't believe it. Sophie hadn't said anything outrageous, yet the WNBA treated her words like a threat. And that was the moment people started to realize, maybe this wasn't just about protecting the league's image, maybe this was about control. That first fine should have been the end of it. A warning shot, maybe. But instead, it was only the beginning. Not long after, Sophie got hit again, this time for a TikTok where she simply lip-synced lyrics that mentioned referees. Another fine followed when she spoke about officiating inconsistencies during her podcast. Before long, she wasn't just a WNBA player anymore, she was the most fined player in the league's history.
When you get fined, do they put like verbatim, like quote here, like this is why you're being fined and this is why it's this much? Or is it like, hey, quit talking shit on us, Venmo us like $1,500?
What happens is they email our GM, and she pulls me aside and she goes, "Come here, Soph, I have to talk to you." And this was in like front of everybody. And I was like, "What did I do now?" And she just smiled and she goes, "Hey."
What's to say on her podcast? But that's just me. That's just how I feel. Then they came and then it came an earlier $500 penalty. I guess for a TikTok video, she was mocking the referees and lip singing. That was funny. So now I got a question for y'all. Do you think that she should be able to say what she wants on her own podcast? Or do you feel like, she should just shut it down and, stop bothering them with all this and that?
And the strangest part? None of these so-called violations were malicious. They weren't attacks, they weren't rumors, they were the kind of honest observations athletes have always made. But in Sophie's case, every word came with a price tag. Fans started giving her a new nickname, the Voice of Truth. Because while the league tried to shut her down, Sophie kept speaking up. And each time they fined her, her following only grew stronger. As the fines piled up, something unexpected happened. Fans rallied behind Sophie with overwhelming support. Social media lit up with clips from her podcast, and people started calling her the only one brave enough to say what everyone else was thinking. Words like truth teller and voice of reason flooded comment sections. And that's when the story stopped being just about Sophie. It became about the WNBA itself. Fans weren't just angry at the fines, they were angry at what the fines represented. To them, it looked like the league was trying to silence its own players instead of listening to them. Some even claimed the WNBA was more focused on protecting its image than protecting its athletes. The frustration grew so loud that it wasn't just about officiating anymore. It was about freedom of speech, transparency, and whether fans could actually trust the league they were supporting.
they are not protecting their players. Nobody's going to watch this if you're not protecting your star player. You're not protecting your players, period. But particularly your star players. No one's going to watch this. People are watching it because of Caitlin Clark, and then even more because of Sophie Cunningham. And if you're going to just hang them out to dry, then, good heavens. And then what? Reese is out. Angel Reese is out too. Is she coming back to WNBA? That's a big question. Nobody's going to watch this anymore because they don't protect their players. It's a worthless organization. They have no idea how to protect their players. But, oh man, they're going to bitch and moan. Well, you better pay us the money. For what? You can't even protect your star players that draw the eyeballs. Now nobody's watching. Nobody's going to watch to see the star players sitting out with injuries because of poor treatment and poor officiating on the sides. Nobody's going to watch that. That's so dumb. I hate it because, man, they had a hot streak.
Sophie had struck a nerve, and suddenly, her podcast wasn't just a show. It was a movement. Here's where things get messy. Sophie wasn't the only player speaking out about referees or league issues. Angel Reese openly said certain players get special whistles during a press conference. Kelsey Plum has stopped entire media sessions to complain about officiating. Coaches have gone off on refs in post-game interviews. And yet, none of them were fined the way Sophie was. Fans couldn't ignore the pattern. Why was Sophie singled out? Why did a light-hearted TikTok or a passing comment cost her hundreds, sometimes thousands of dollars, when others could say far worse without consequence? The inconsistency didn't just make the league look strict, it made them look selective. And in sports, once fans sense favoritism or double standards, trust starts to collapse. Suddenly, the fines weren't just about Sophie anymore. They raised a much bigger question. Was the WNBA enforcing rules, or enforcing silence? The truth is, the WNBA already had a problem on its hands long before Sophie spoke up. Fans and analysts have been complaining about inconsistent officiating all season. Star players have voiced frustration, coaches have called it embarrassing, and even media veterans like Rebecca Lobo admitted the league needs to fix it. But instead of addressing those concerns head-on, the WNBA chose a different route: punish the player who dared to say it out loud. And that decision backfired in a massive way. By fining Sophie again and again, the league unintentionally made her the face of a much bigger issue. Every time she got hit with another penalty, it only reinforced the idea that the WNBA cared more about controlling the message than solving the problem. Fans weren't just questioning the referees anymore, they were questioning the entire organization. And in sports, once fans start doubting the credibility of the league itself, that's a dangerous place to be. Most athletes, when faced with repeated fines, would eventually back down. It's not worth the money, the stress, or the constant target on their back. But Sophie Cunningham? She took the exact opposite route. Instead of softening her words, she sharpened them. Instead of playing it safe, she doubled down. On her podcast, you can actually hear the mix of frustration and defiance in her voice. At one point she laughs, almost mocking the league, and says, $500 isn't going to do anything. I'll just keep getting fined. To most players, that's a nightmare scenario, losing money every time you open your mouth. To Sophie, it became fuel. And here's what made it even more powerful. The WNBA isn't like the NBA. Players don't earn millions every season. They don't have bottomless bank accounts to absorb penalties. So, for Sophie to keep speaking up despite the financial hit, fans saw that as proof she wasn't chasing headlines or attention. She was taking real risks to stand by what she believed in. That courage turned her into more than just another athlete, it made her a symbol. Every new fine became a badge of honor, a reminder that she wasn't afraid of the league's intimidation tactics. Fans started saying things like, "Sophie's paying to tell us the truth," and in a way, they weren't wrong. She was literally sacrificing money to give people the honesty they craved. And this wasn't blind rebellion, either. Sophie wasn't spouting off random insults or looking for drama. She was careful, thoughtful, but unapologetically real. That balance, being bold without being reckless, only boosted her credibility. She wasn't some hothead lashing out. She was a professional who had simply decided that her voice mattered more than her wallet. The result? Her reputation skyrocketed. Fans who barely followed the WNBA suddenly knew her name. Clips from her podcast spread across social media like wildfire. And with every episode, every fine, every bold statement, Sophie Cunningham's influence grew stronger. The league may have tried to paint her as a problem, but in the eyes of fans, she was quickly becoming something else entirely, a hero. Here's the part that almost feels unbelievable. Sophie Cunningham wasn't some rogue player out to destroy the WNBA's reputation. In fact, she was doing the opposite. With her podcast, Show Me Something, she was pulling back the curtain and giving fans the kind of access they crave: raw, authentic, unfiltered conversations straight from someone living it every day. That's the kind of content money can't buy. Think about it. Most professional leagues beg their athletes to show more personality, to connect with fans outside of the game, to build brands that bring in attention. The NBA leans on stars like Draymond Green, who built his own podcast empire, sometimes recording episodes right after playoff games. The NFL promotes players who stream on Twitch or post behind-the-scenes vlogs. It's free marketing. It humanizes the athletes, makes them more relatable, and strengthens the connection between fans and the league. The WNBA had all of that gift wrapped in Sophie Cunningham, a fiery competitor, a polarizing personality, and someone who wasn't afraid to say what others wouldn't. She was controversial enough to stir conversation, but charismatic enough to keep people listening. In other words, she was a walking storyline. But instead of embracing her, the league tried to shut her down. They treated her podcast not as an asset, but as a liability. And here's where the irony cuts deep. Every fine they handed down only made Sophie bigger. Each penalty became a headline. Each punishment became proof that she was being targeted. Fans stopped seeing her as just a basketball player and started seeing her as a symbol, someone brave enough to risk her own
Sophie's
paycheck for
voice
honesty.
echoing through
What
a
the league
post-game
thought
presser.
would silence
It was
her
a
ended up
rallying cry.
amplifying her voice.
Kelsey Mitchell.
And the harder they pushed against her, the more she became the star they didn't want but desperately needed. By now, it's obvious this saga is about more than just Sophie Cunningham. Her story has become a mirror, one that reflects the WNBA's deeper issues. The fines, the silencing, the selective enforcement, it all adds up to something bigger, a culture of fear. Behind closed doors, plenty of players and coaches share Sophie's frustrations. They've all seen questionable officiating. They've all experienced inconsistent treatment. And many of them have ideas on how to fix it. But they won't say it out loud. Why? Because Sophie showed them exactly what happens when you do. Speak up, and you pay the price. That's the environment the league has created, one where silence feels safer than honesty. And in sports, that's dangerous. Because fans don't just follow a league for the games. They follow for the stories, the personalities, the drama, the voices that make the sport feel alive. When players are afraid to be real, the product suffers. And here's the twist, fans can sense it. They can tell when players are holding back. They can feel when interviews are scripted, when press conferences are watered down, when everyone is too scared to say what they really think. That lack of authenticity makes people tune out. Sophie Cunningham broke through that wall. She spoke honestly, and fans responded with overwhelming support. Why? Because authenticity is magnetic. People don't just want highlights and stats, they want raw emotion, unfiltered opinions, and personalities that feel human. Sophie gave them exactly that. And the WNBA? Instead of celebrating her, they punished her. That decision didn't just hurt Sophie, it hurt the league itself. Because the more fans rallied around her, the more obvious it became that the league was on the wrong side of its own story. The bigger picture is simple. Sophie Cunningham's fight isn't just about fines or podcasts. It's about whether the WNBA wants to be a league that embraces authenticity, or one that fears it. And right now, the way they've handled Sophie has fans wondering if the league even understands what its audience truly wants. So let's step back for a second. Sophie Cunningham started a podcast, spoke her mind, and ended up becoming the most fined player in the WNBA. But instead of silencing her, those fines only amplified her voice. Fans now see her as the one player willing to say what nobody else dares to. And in the process, she's exposed something bigger than officiating or league politics. She's exposed a culture where honesty is treated like a threat. The league wanted to control the story. Instead, they created one of the most talked about players in women's basketball. And here's the real question. How long can the WNBA keep fining Sophie before the backlash grows too big to ignore? Because at this point, it doesn't look like Sophie is backing down. If anything, every fine just makes her louder. And that leaves the league with a choice: change the system, or risk watching one of their own stars turn into the biggest force for change the WNBA has ever seen.